thank you, Nir. So I really want to thank Nir for putting together this series. We have a great series that we're going to hear today from Rich Batiuk. And then we have Stephanie Fong and Jim McLaren. So when we were thinking about this, we really wanted people to think about Bay Delta issues and how do we encourage and improve connections across the Bay and Delta. And actually, it was Mike Chakowski's suggestion that we invite Rich Batiuk and that we not just think about that from our perspective, but that we get some outside advice and think about how other systems have thought about large-scale monitoring, large-scale application of science to management questions. And so Rich came highly, actually when Mike suggested that to me, then I talked with a couple other people, and they all said, yes, that's the perfect person to invite. And so Rich has served as the Associate Director of Science Analysis and Implementation at the Chesapeake Bay Program. He was at EPA. He's recently retired, so he can talk freely about all kinds of things, and I think he will. And he spent over 30 years at the Chesapeake Bay Program, dealing with many of the same kinds of issues we have here, especially nutrient issues and water quality. So that's really what all three talks are going to focus on, integrating across the Bay and Delta with a particular focus on water quality issues. And so Rich has dealt with those kinds of issues, and really in leading that program, in leading the science component of the Chesapeake Bay Program, really thought a lot about what we think about in terms of how do you use science, how do you direct science so that it's effective in terms of management, and on a really big scale in the Chesapeake, from the Bay all the way up into the watershed. We were talking yesterday about his working with groups up in upstate New York, and how thinking about how do you manage up in those areas to affect issues in Chesapeake. So I'm excited to hear Rich's talk, and so I won't bore you more with an introduction and let Rich take over.
All right, good afternoon. Greetings from across the country there. So the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership actually got started in 1983. So we're well into our fourth decade working as a partnership. It's a state, federal, local, academic business partnership. So when I refer to we, I'm not referring to EPA, others. I'm actually referring to this partnership as I walk you through there. And we're fortunate to have, as I said, 3.5, now working to 4 decades worth of experience. So what I want to do is to share some of the lessons learned that I think apply not only into the Delta, to your watershed, the San Francisco Bay, but could be at smaller watershed scales as well. For those online, this is your webinar speaker here. The reason why he's smiling, this picture was taken 2 weeks before he retired after 32 years with EPA. So you can understand what that grin's about. Here's the office that he inhabited for many of those 33 years. And here's his new office. Part of his responsibilities of going around the Chesapeake Bay watershed, fishing, kayaking, canoeing, and doing other kinds of work to be sure that the bay is actually improving. And now I'm out here into the California Delta. Unfortunately, I just needed to add another couple days on to get out onto San Francisco, up into the Sacramento, up and actually into the Sierra Nevadas to see how it's all working. Maybe next time here you'll extend my stay here with you. So, focus it down on 6 key lessons learned over the last 3 decades. What I want to do is to actually take each one of them, give you some examples of that lesson learned in action, and then finish up with, when I did all 6 of those lessons learned together, what does it mean in terms of actually bringing back a watershed? A 64,000 square mile watershed, parts of 6 states in the District of Columbia. When I started in EPA in 1985, we had 12 million people in the watershed. We're now above 18 million people. In less than about 3.5 decades, a 50% increase in human population. As I'm going to show you, you would be pleased at having a career that you just sort of held that human footprint that increased by 50% in terms of pollutant loads, impacts on the system, an inclusive management structure and governance. Think of it as building a very, very large tent, big enough to include all the different partners, the stakeholders that you need to have in that decision-making process, but also have rules of how you're going to work with each other, how you're going to make decisions, how information is going to flow, agreed to, and then a well-oiled machine, staff, funded, and actually prompted with good political direction of what's happening out there. That doesn't happen overnight. We developed it really, and it's continuing to evolve in the Chesapeake region now, well into our fourth decade. But let me walk you through a little bit of that. So what you're looking at is the current management structure of the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership. This structure itself, again, is really setting up a large mechanism for folks to be able to come to the table, whether it's on fisheries issues, land conservation, atmospheric deposition, climate change, to be able to bring issues to the table, to work the science, to understand, to develop the policy, bring it up to the cabinet secretaries of the 6 states in the District of Columbia, their federal counterparts, and eventually bring it to 6 governors, a mayor, an EPA administrator, and the chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. So if you look at all the boxes up on there, every one of them, except the 2 at the top, the Executive Council and the Principal Staff Committee, Executive Council, the governors of the 6 states, the District of Columbia mayor, EPA administrator, and the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and the state cabinet secretaries of the natural resources, fisheries, etc., their federal counterparts. Everyone else, over 1,000 individuals, they actually work and make decisions collaboratively and through consensus. And I want to talk a little bit about how you make that happen. They don't vote. They don't outright. If one individual member that's a part of a work group or one of our implementation committee disagrees, we have a system and mechanism for either working that through or elevating the system. That's important because we want to be sure that everyone's voice is heard, but at the same time, nobody can hold the whole system hostage without moving forward and making this happen as well. Some key things in what you're looking at is there's a series of advisory committees that are independent, but they are themselves staffed by independent groups as well. So that's that sense of independence. So we have a voice for our over 1,600 local governments across the 6-state watershed, our scientific community, not just the academic folks, but folks in business, as well as in state and federal agencies that have the science basis, as well as our citizenry, our business community, our agricultural community, others that are represented through advocacy, etc. out there. They have a voice at the table. You'll notice the blue boxes, which is probably the most important one, and that is our basic structure is based on 6 goals that are embedded in the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And I'll show you in a minute an evolution of those agreements that started in 1983, but embedded in our organization are what, in fact, are we all striving for? And we built our organization up and top. And like any good tree that's got a good foundation, you look underneath that root system goes deep. In this case, across that same structure of the 6 goal areas. So there's a reminder exactly what are we working on, whether it's on fisheries, habitats, water quality, watersheds, stewardship, meaning education and outreach, as well as governing the system itself. And then the number of work groups actually evolve over time depending on the sets of issues that are in there as well. What these green boxes allow us to do is to have a place where our technical and our programmatic folks from all different partners, all different stakeholders, have an opportunity to work together, to build agreements, to take the science, the understanding on those particular issues, work them up through the system, and actually a place where our policy folks have staff and expertise drawn from all the appropriate groups to carry out the work as well. So that a governing system that matches the issues that you have. Some folks say that's pretty complicated, Rich. 64,000 square miles. You have to change the behavior of 18 million people, 75,000 farms out there, over 3,000 wastewater treatment facilities that are permitted. It's a complicated system out there, folks. If you're going to manage an ecosystem, you've got to organize yourself along that as well. One of the other lessons learned in terms of governance, and that is involve the highest levels of leadership. In the case of the Chesapeake, we're talking governors, mayors, administrators, but also when we bring in our local governments, we're talking mayors, council people of townships, boroughs, cities, counties, depending on which state you're in there as well. When we bring in our academic partners and others, we bring in laboratory directors, presidents of universities out there as well. We bring in people that are for the business community as well. So as you're looking at working the highest levels of leadership, you want to try to bring in people that, in fact, when they bring it back to their fellow academicians, when they bring it back to the state, when they bring it back to the local governments, they have the opportunity to empower and bring other people to the table as well. What it does in the bottom line, written down there, a vast partnership of all the major players in the Chesapeake region working collaboratively on science, policy, and restoration efforts. That's not just a bunch of words. That actually embodies a partnership, and it's coming into its fourth decade of a level of maturity that's out there. Do we still fight with each other? Heck yes. There's issues out there. Do we fight over water like you guys do? No, you got us over on that one. But we do crabs, oysters, rockfish, grasses, a whole bunch of other stuff. So we have our topics as well. But I hope to show you that by building a governance system and you make that tent big enough, you can resolve a lot of those issues within the family and not have public squabbles out there. We have our disagreements, but we have mechanisms for working out within our family itself. But one of the reasons why we're able to work with this big, sometimes a little crazy family, we have crazy aunts and uncles out there and cousins you don't want to recognize, but you have to. And that is, there's a Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership Office in Annapolis, around 70 staff, but only less than 20 of them are EPA. It's EPA funded, but it's not the EPA Partnership Office. It's the Partnerships Office that's supported. These fine gentlemen and my counterpart when I was working there, they're EPA employees. But on my staff of about 43, I had University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, Penn State. I had U.S. Geological Survey. We had U.S. Forest Service. I had the Alliance for Chesapeake Bay, a non-advocacy, non-governmental organization. What we built into our partnership office was actually a reflection of the diversity of the partners we had out there as well. Through different types of agreements, we actually had on staff scientists, policy folks, programmatic folks, budget folks, drawn not from EPA, but from our larger partnership out there as well. So when our partners turned to the office to get support, they were not just talking to an EPA person, they might have been talking to a Fed partner, a state partner, an academic partner, an NGO partner along the way as well. And that staff also was there to support and feed that infrastructure that I showed you. But it's not just important to set up that organizational chart and have an office there to support that partnership. Here's some of the, what I would call the glue or the oil, depending on which way you're looking at, to hold that partnership together and to be sure that those gears are working away. One of the key things we found along that process was getting, in our case, our governors, with the mayor, the administrator, and the chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, to set up high-level policy agreements with specific goals, which have become more and more specific and more clear as we've gone from 1983 through the latest agreement in 2014. Strategies and work plans. If you don't know where you're going and you don't have the political agreement to get there, how can you change an ecosystem that's being influenced, in this case, by 18 million people? Or at any one time, there could be 900 million chickens on the eastern shore. Not that they're going to listen to us, but they may listen to, what's his name, Purdue out there. But you got to have sort of a guidepost to where you're going. That's the first one. We talked about the governance structure with plenty of room around the table. In some cases, we actually need to create new tables to have other folks come to the partnership based on the issues. A shared budget. There's an EPA budget that started at $3 million per year in 1984. We're now at $72 million. That is EPA dollars, but a lot of the decision making with that is shared one that's in the partnership, and it's used to actually operate the partners, and that funding gets used at parts where other state agencies, other partners couldn't do things that the partnership needs to happen. Keeping that information distributed out there, we can talk a little bit about that as well. One of the things that we've done that's pretty unique, and that is tracking when we fence out cows out there, when we put a bioinfiltration system in place in the city, when a stream has been restored, those activities that have been happening over the last 35 years, we actually have a record. So you can actually look back 30 years and say, what's happened on that landscape, and how is that translated into changes on the overland flow, what the level of nutrients are happening, what's happening on the groundwater. So tracking, verifying practices and implementation on the ground, and then using to understand and explain what happened and what didn't happen has been very effective. And then the sixth one down here, really it's trying to build tools, whether it's analyzing 30 years worth of monitoring data, using environmental to not only developing that tech out there and working it up, you've got to have mechanisms that institutionalize this ability for folks to come together, work, support them, and take those decisions, those recommendations, and put them into play to be sure that they end up either changing policies or actually making something happen on the ground out there as well. The next one down, and that sounds like everybody would be supportive of, developing a good scientific foundation on which to base your decisions. That makes sense to a lot of folks, but how do you go about doing that? Let me share some of what we've learned over the last 3.5 decades. One of the key ones, and that it was one of the boxes that were one of the 3 advisory committees, and that is we have a scientific and technical advisory committee, or STAC as we refer to it. They are independent. They react to issues and stuff coming from the management committee, but they also have a proactive role. In other words, to look out beyond what's happening out there. And they advise up to the governor's level, as well as all the way through the partnership itself. We spent a lot of time in the last 3.5 decades ensuring that there was a clear independence of this group. They're funded through a consortium of universities. They have their own staff out there. The scientists that are involved in it actually are not paid. Their travel is covered. But I can tell you, when there's an opening on this staff, this advisory committee, a lot of people are interested in doing it. Why? Because they're able to bring their science to the table. They know that as it's brought together, not only their own individual science, but others, it's going to work itself into management. It's going to influence policy. It's going to change how that ecosystem is managed and restored out there as well. So doing that, one example is, and I've got it here as a cover of that, we have a series of dams on the Susquehanna. It's a major river at the head of the Chesapeake Bay. It brings about 50% of the flow into the system. We have a series of hydroelectric dams on that were built in the 1920s time period. 3 of the dams have filled up over time, so they no longer trap any sediment and nutrients behind it. But the third dam, which is kind of Conowingo Dam, we thought we actually had another 10, 15 years worth of opportunity for sediment and therefore nitrogen and phosphorus to be trapped behind that dam. As we looked at our data, we found out that in fact, that dam has reached its equilibrium, and whatever was coming down was actually coming into the Chesapeake. And all of a sudden, fingers started being pointed, particularly from below the dam in Maryland, Virginia, up to Pennsylvania, and saying, you guys have just lost, so pardon my French, but your best dam BMP, best management practice. In other words, this thing was actually saving Pennsylvania a lot because it was reducing the amount of nutrients and sediments coming into the Chesapeake. It actually became a political issue during the Maryland governor's race in there. So we asked our scientific and technical advisory committee to actually draw together the science. They used workshops. They used development of a synthesis paper. And they came out of this workshop in January of 2016 with a very clear science story. And then we took that science story, worked with science communicators, and essentially came out with, here's what they agreed to. Science is the issues. We took it up to our cabinet-level secretaries and their federal counterparts, and we resolved what could have been a political catastrophe of the partnership, breaking divisions between our states and getting us all wrapped around a particular issue that we didn't need to. So you have a scientific advisory group that has the ability to draw the science together, and had the credibility to do it. They were not always focused on the relevance. That's where people like myself in this next slide worked in, and that is one of the key things that we saw in there, and it was important to bring in science synthesizers. In other words, part of my job was not just as an EPA employee, but the partnership actually invested into me and actually asked me to synthesize that science, to work between the scientific community, our policy folks, or technical folks, to draw that together. Another one is this example of a publication over here that was actually led by the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, where they work with academic partners and others to then say, hey, listen, we're 25 years into the Chesapeake. What's working? What's not? Let's bring a bunch of case studies to show ourselves where's the agricultural community making a difference and where is it not? Are we making any headway on the stormwater side? Have we been able to turn the corner on atmospheric deposition? So we built into the system mechanisms for synthesizing science, not just for scientific sake, but driven by management needs and asks, as well as their counterparts of mine and some of our state and federal agencies. Our U.S. Geological Survey colleagues have actually funded a full-time Chesapeake Bay coordinator. So USGS felt it was important enough as a federal partner to invest in a not just synthesizing it, but connecting it, making it relevant to all the decisions, the issues that are facing the partnership, from fisheries to water quality issues to conservation to fostering stewardship in there as well. Another mechanism too, again, to take that science and get it into policy is using shared mechanisms. In our case, it was a series of environmental models, and that is, given that we had 64,000 square miles, millions of humans out there, hundreds of millions of cows, chickens, hogs across the Chesapeake Bay watershed itself, millions of septic systems, thousands of wastewater treatment facilities out there. We felt we needed to, and through the history really from the 1970s through current, needed a series of models to organize that information and allow us to say, what if we did the following? We looked at air share because early parts of the program, about a third of our nitrogen came in from the air. We needed to look at the changes in land use from the 1950s to here, given our population was increasing. We needed the ability to develop scenarios that said, we're going to make these changes in these treatment plants, ask the farming community to do the following, and take the following stormwater management practices and put them in place. We needed to account for all the sources and the land use and the climate that was happening in the watershed and the tidal waters in terms of the tides and the movement of nutrient sediments, contaminants, and then also things like oysters and menhaden that were filtering the water. So these series of models are actually now in about their sixth generation over the last 40 years. They are partnership models. They don't belong to any individual partner out there, but they are incredible abilities to synthesize the science. They don't provide answers, but they're a tool that are used by the partnership as a whole, as well as our local partners, state partners, to make decisions and to help inform decisions about nutrient management practices, land conservation efforts out there as well. But the key thing is here is to find mechanisms that allow you to organize, pull the science together, and apply it in management contexts that you might not have thought of otherwise, but are shared by a collective partnership, not one individual partner over another. One of the key things we learned early on, but it takes a while to do, and that is you got to set what your end goal is out there, and not just the warm and fuzzy, good water quality, sufficient waters out there. They need to be numeric. Why? So you can actually measure progress against them, and why that's important, to hold yourself accountable, not only to your partners, but ultimately to the public. Let me give you a couple examples of what we've done out there and why it's important to have numerical goals and to have a mechanism for putting them out there and doing it. So I'm going to get away from water quality in a second. I'm going to talk about crabs. We argue about crabs like you guys argue about water. So what you're looking at is, sorry guys in the audience there, these are female crabs. That's who we care about. You males only have one thing to do. Once you're done, we can catch you. It's the females that produce the next round of it. So what you're looking at is the fisheries independent estimate of the number of crabs out in the Chesapeake Bay. It's millions of crabs from 1990 to 2016. The bottom dotted line across there is the threshold below what our fishery scientists indicate. If you're below that, you're essentially out fishing that fishery. You're going to lose that crab population. The target level is, if you're above that, you can take as many crabs down to that particular level and still have a sustainable harvest. But you can see by 2000, 2001, we were about to lose one of the most hardy little critters out there. It can live in a small jar with a small amount of oxygen and pretty poor quality fish food. We were out fishing it, but also didn't have the right water quality conditions and habitat. So we got together between the two states who had two different fishery programs in place. We got our fishery scientists to work with our managers and with our state legislators, because they actually manage the fisheries, the states and each of the states differently, agreed to these two thresholds, started to change the fishery, and you can see by 2010, we're above the threshold, and unfortunately I didn't have a chance to put 2017. We had the largest amount of crabs out there. We estimated 54 million female crabs were in the Chesapeake in 2017. That's not just management. There's natural ups and downs in the system because of weather conditions and others. But we want to try to get to that target of certainly being above that threshold so that they can bounce down, because when the crabs are down, the price of crabs goes up. People in Baltimore don't have one of their sustainable fisheries out there, and we don't have crab fees. We don't have crab fees. People are not drinking beer. They're not drinking beer. The economy goes to heck out there. Seriously, I mean, crabs are not only recreational fees, they're part of the culture in the Chesapeake. clean water out there, you can actually provide a great port. And here's something that our University of Maryland colleagues do working with our academic partners, and that is every year they put out the Chesapeake Bay report card. Talk about some competition. We've actually had mayors of cities and executives of the individual counties across Maryland, Virginia, start to share, hey, I got a B+. What'd you get on your report card out there? There's nothing like getting two humans competing against each other in terms of a grade out there. So we're doing it down to the river system. We're actually taking it further down because our monitoring data allows us to do that. And the partnership every year reports back to the public on how the ecosystem's doing, how the watershed's doing, and how are we collectively, are we putting the actions in place necessary to bring back crabs and waterfowl and protected lands and public access, and how many of those K through 12 kids are getting an environmental experience out there that's meaningful from a Chesapeake Bay and a river specific perspective. There's science behind that, absolutely, but just about everybody understands an A versus a D versus an F. It is a strong public message out there that keeps us accountable, and the trend is built in there as well. That's when you know your science is working and you're communicating because you have a clear numeric goal and you're communicating in a form that just about everybody in the public can understand. And one of the other elements that's a part of this is once you've got that in there, then set yourself up for a regular means of reassessing your goals. What you're seeing is the 1983 Chesapeake Bay Agreement that started the partnership all the way through our 2025 deadline for essentially having the pollution reductions in place that we need in order to bring back clean water. About every 5 to 7 years, there's either a change to our agreement, a reevaluation, or an opportunity to open up the policy, bring in new science, bring in new understanding, lock it back down again, and keep it moving. And that way the scientific community knows they will have an opportunity to bring in new, fresh understanding. And at the same time, the politicians, local, state, elected officials know that there's going to be a time period in which we know what the goal lines are, we know what we need to set up in terms of our fiscal investments and what our rules and regulations need to be. So both sides, our policy folks and our scientific folks, have the opportunity to get what they need all the way through there. And you have the opportunity to adapt to new information over time as well. So I know that there's a lot to be seen up here. Hopefully we'll make the webinar and the presentation acceptable to you all so you can have a chance to take a look at sort of the sequence of evaluations over time to do that, make it happen. One of the other key ones, and this is related to water quality, and that is to define clean water simply. I mean, a lot of you have advanced degrees in your particular area. I'm not going to sit there and explain to my neighbors the nitrogen cycle and how important denitrification is to them. They would like to go, what the heck is it? But they can understand, as well as a class of third graders, which are smarter than a lot of us these days, that fish, like us humans, they need oxygen to breathe. House plants, if you put them in a closet and go away for a summer vacation over 4 weeks, they're going to die. And kids can only last so long with chicken McNuggets and cheeseburgers out there. So oxygen-like food. There you've described it out of the Chesapeake Bay. Very simple. My neighbors can understand it. My politicians in Capitol Hill can understand it. Farmers can deal with it. Wastewater treatment operators that make sense to us. So we didn't end up fighting about what clean water was defined as. We haven't had a lawsuit that had a disagreement about where we're going. Why? Because we built those, and then we went back into the Chesapeake. We said, hey, listen, the Clean Water Act says we need to be fishable, swimmable. Well, if you and I, were out there fishing, you caught a fish and I didn't, you thought, oh, yeah, the Chesapeake's fishable. And I'm looking at it, it's like, heck, no, it isn't. Let's figure it out so that if you're in New York and you're 400 miles upstream on the Susquehanna and another 300 before you're getting down to the Bay Mouth, you know when we've hit clean water in the Chesapeake that you've met your obligations. Why? Because we've taken those definitions of clear water, oxygen, and good fish food and connected them up where we want underwater grasses to grow, where you're down at the deep, you're down at 30, 40 feet, you're down in areas that right now don't have oxygen, but we need oxygen down there for food for blue crabs. So we've converted fishable, swimmable into terms that people can understand. This is where the natural resources are, but then we've also put them into state water quality standards in terms that meet what the Clean Water Act is saying. So a simple definition of clean water, essentially like that, in planning a zoning map for a town or for a city, we mapped out the Chesapeake in said, here's the different habitats. And then we took the next step, working with our fishery scientists, with our scientists and water quality and different critters out there, but also with our regulated community. And we agreed that if you're a mother rockfish, and you're bringing around about 1 million kids, you're not only a little grumpy because you want to get them up to the spawning areas, you need good, clean water. You need 6 milligrams per liter. But if you're a worm or clam down the bottom and you're down at 40 feet in the Chesapeake, you're pretty happy with 1. But previously, Maryland said 5, Virginia said 4, and D.C. said 4.5. That same mother rockfish, as she came up and she spawned outside of D.C., came through 3 different water quality standards, none of which were protective of her. So we went back, and as a group, 6 states, the district, all of our stakeholders, we agreed on simply that definition of clean water, but we also matched it up with what the natural system needed and the critters in the time periods that they needed as well. So we got essentially a collective agreement, went to the governors, got their agreement as well. So we lined everybody up. We took this and we built it back into Maryland, Virginia, D.C., and Delaware's state water quality standards regulations. So we had a legal definition that everybody bought into across a 6-state watershed. We haven't had one lawsuit disagreeing with how we define the clean water out there. You know how important that was? Because we took this discussion off of what is clean water to how we're going to get there. We'll talk about that as well. The other thing that we did is we took the mystery of once you've identified what the good oxygen levels are, how much light you need, what's good fish food, we also agreed on, if we took all those millions of data points that we're collecting through a collective set of monitoring programs, we know exactly how we're going to analyze that data and see whether is that water impaired or not, is it healthy or not, so that somebody in Albany, New York, and somebody in Richmond, Virginia, could come up with the exact same answer for anywhere in the Chesapeake Bay, taking that same exact set of data. So we took the guesswork out of not only what is clean water, but how you define it in a legal context from a standards attainment perspective. Again, not one lawsuit, not one set of disagreement, because we all know what it is, how we're going to make her to get there. And when you get there, the public knows, because every year when we're telling them through maps like this, is your local river or stream, is it meeting our collective definition of clean water? And we put it even simpler. What you're seeing here is you're looking into the Chesapeake. We actually have our standards, which are actually with different depths, because we have different fish that inhabit the surface waters versus the deep waters. At the surface, if you're at green, you're essentially at attainment. You're blue, you're close. But if you look on your right-hand side, that's our death zone. That's places where we have absolutely no oxygen in the system, but we need to get 1 milligram per liter in there. That's huge ecologically. But in our old water quality standards, we needed to get to 5 from the top to the bottom. I can tell you when John Smith brought his hydro lab and he took a dissolved oxygen sample in 1620, he and Pocahontas didn't see 5 milligrams per liter on the bottom. They might have seen 2, because it's naturally as a very productive system. We were setting ourselves up with standards that could never be attained, even if we moved all of us out of that system, much less our Native Americans were in that particular system. So we made standards that made sense, that they were able to understand, that they applied consistently across that, and all 4 states adopt them at the same time, and we haven't had, again, any litigation on this definition of clean water. What we also did is we built up that science. EPA published it on behalf of those states, and they took a regulatory action at the same time. It was the smoothest regulatory action that any of our 4 states had taken in decades. And you were making some massive changes out there. You had wastewater treatment facilities. You had cities out there that were going to influence farmers, lots of people. It was the smoothest set of public meetings we did. Why? Because we did it collectively, and we backed each other up, and we had a common definition, and we had actually laid a whole bunch of groundwork through that large management structure well before any of the states sort of went over the start line at the same time we did that. Something that my agency still scratches their head and says, how in the heck did you do that? Because we normally don't do that. You know, we dictate from top down. We actually don't work down and say that. We don't normally work clearly with partners, multiple states, and actually do it from the bottom up. But in this case, we did it from both sides. We got it done, and now we have a clear definition of what's happening out there from a water quality perspective. Finishing up here, a couple more key lessons learned. One certainly is maintaining a partnership-based set of monitoring networks out there. But the key thing Here's an example, too. Here's a set of about 11, probably about 15, 20 different program elements in our shared monitoring systems. More of these are water quality and biological based. What I'm showing you is if the arrow starts at 85 and goes all the way across, that means that we continue that program. There are ones over time that we've actually started and stopped. Why? Because in talking with our management community, there was either a need that was finished up, or as we looked at it, that monitoring was really not being used to drive management decisions at a local scale or at a nationwide scale. And there are times that they were saying, we don't have the right information, we need you to start something up as well. So in our case, our monitoring systems, they're not evaluated every year, but periodically we build them through that. We go to the decision makers, not just at the top of the state, but our local partners, our regional partners, and ask them what other information is necessary out there. Is our collective networks meeting what we need to have? If not, let's as a partnership make adjustments to that. That is extremely powerful. What it allows you to do is following, and this is something that's actually operational on the partnership's website. You can actually go into any sub-watershed out there and draw together trends of information in terms of what's happening in the system, diagnostics. You can bring in land use information. You can use models to understand how much load is coming off of there. What this does by building up long-term monitoring systems, supporting models, building in other things, you actually build mechanisms that allow state partners, local partners, watershed organizations out there to look at the local scale and actually have tools to make decisions on where they want to go into the future with good, solid information that's consistent across 6 different states as well. So you and I could spend another 15, 20 minutes talking about this. This is certainly something that's taken us decades to get there, but the power of these tools and the level at which they're now being used, thousands of users now have access to this kind of information. When we're trying to take our partnership in its implementation to a local scale, is extremely, extremely powerful. And then finally, one of the things that we have had some success, but I'll admit we have had a tough road, and that is holding people accountable, holding our partners accountable. So we got, actually it was a governor of Virginia who happened to be a vice president candidate with a certain Clinton recently. He actually was the one who was state governor, not an EPA governor, a state governor said we need to build an accountability system because us governors are in place either 4 years or 8 years or 2 years, depending on which state you're in. And we're gone, but our legacy has got to continue on there as well. So one of the things that, why we did this, I'm going to point out my Pennsylvania colleagues, and that is what you're looking at is here's our estimated modeling and monitor-based estimates of loads coming out of Pennsylvania to the Chesapeake, 1985, around 122 million pounds that they're coming into. They need to get down to around 74 million pounds of nitrogen. Here's what the estimated progress they've made today. Yes, taking 15 million pounds out of that is a lot of good progress, but they're 34 million pounds short. Our other states are within 2 or 3 million pounds of getting there. We have to hold Pennsylvania accountable for not carrying out their part of the load, their part of the reductions, their part of the agreements of what's happening out there. That's one of the downfalls that we've done on the EPA side. We haven't held them as accountable as they should. We have not carried out what the governor of Virginia and the partnership agreed to be put in place. There's got to be, not that you want to be punitive against one of your state or local partners, but you've got to hold folks accountable because the public is expecting clean water as they've been promised. We do this as well, and you can see this is essentially an EPA evaluation of the 6 states in the district. Pennsylvania gets not black eyes, they get red eyes. I can tell you, governors, mayors are not happy when the public sees that, in fact, they are not doing as good as, say, Virginia, which was across the board in great shape. West Virginia, the same thing as well. So that public embarrassment is part of that accountability system. But there's also got to be other components that we haven't fully pulled through. But the bottom line is, folks, it's working. You take those 6 pieces together, you put them in place. Yes, in some cases it takes years or decades to put it in place. But let me give you a quick snapshot of why I say it's working. This is 3,000 big, small, and medium-sized wastewater treatment facilities. The black line is the actual flow over time where we've been increasing the number of humans. The combined two, the top part of the bar, the red is industrial, the blue is municipal. They've reduced nitrogen and phosphorus. So I didn't have this, but this is nitrogen. They not only reduced it by does the state, federal, and local partnership meet a goal, but meet it a decade early and meet it with much more effective and reductions? So the technology's out there, the regulatory system's out there, and these guys have done it, and our streams and rivers are a lot cleaner because of, look at how much less nitrogen pollution coming into that particular system. Here's overall our phosphorus production. So that size of the pie is relative to that. So about almost a 50% reduction in the amount of phosphorus coming from agriculture, coming from wastewater treatment facilities, coming from reforesting land out there as well. You'll notice that our developed land is actually increasing. We're holding the line right now on those additional 6 million people out there. We're now starting to actually reduce what's coming off of the developed land. But we put the Chesapeake Bay on a pollution diet, on a regulatory one back in 2010. We've been working at this since 1985. That's a lot to ask for a watershed of 64,000 square miles that has increased its human population by 50% to actually not hold the line, but to reduce it by that amount. That's a lot of people, thousands and thousands of farmers, municipalities, local elected officials, and others working together. Here's the same graphic for nitrogen. Not as much of a reduction, but that's 82 million pounds of nitrogen that's not going into the Chesapeake, into algae in forms that are not good for rockfish and crabs and oysters and others out there at the base of our food chain. We still have some more work to do. A good portion of that, as you saw, was coming out of Pennsylvania, and a lot of that's going to come working with their farmers as well. But that's a significant reduction. Here's, I think, an important graphic as well. What you're seeing is our best estimate through monitoring data and where we can't monitor it through model data in the bars. And that's all the collective loads that we're seeing over time. So the bars themselves are estimates of nitrogen load. The blue line is actually the amount of water coming off in terms of river flow. So for the first 15 years, every time it rained, the amount of pollution went up. Every time we had a record drought, pollution went down. Look around 2005, 2006 time period. What you'll notice is, even when it rains, the pollution level doesn't go up as much. So that we've actually separated between the amount of river flow that's coming in there compared to the amount of pollution. And this is a graph just to sort of illustrate that. We have done the statistics to actually separate out. Here's the human influence versus the natural influence. Most of our rivers are actually showing a reduction, even in the face of, in some cases, more intensive rainfalls out there. So we're breaking that habit. We're making the system being more resilient. We're absorbing more rainfall on there. We're letting less nutrients and sediments run off of our backyards, our farm fields, our city streets out there. We still have a ways to go, but we've seen clear progress across the board. Here's one of the most stunning ones that I never thought that I would see in my 33-year career working with the partnership. On your left-hand side, or your right-hand side, that's our 166 monitoring stations showing the trends of nitrogen over the past 30 years. If it has a downward green arrow, that means statistically over the last 30 years, the amount of nitrogen in that water column, that's a big bucket of water out there, folks. You got to take a lot out in order to see a statistically significant trend over 30 years. There are hardly any stations. There's none that are going up, and there are a few that are just closed circles, which means that there's no trend. And here's it for the watershed. If it's a downward pointing purple arrow, that means in the streams and rivers, the actual load that we're seeing is reducing as well. That's pretty widespread. We're not there for nitrogen. We don't have time to show phosphorus on the system as well. But we're seeing in our streams and rivers, hundreds of them out there, and across our tidal waters, our nitrogen phosphorus concentrations are headed down. Not only that, but one of our most difficult problems to solve, and that is in our what we call our dead water zone, or places where we don't have any oxygen at all. The volume of no oxygen areas down there has actually been decreasing over the past 30 years as well. The place that is sort of considered the deepest part of the coal mine, you got a canary down there, and the canary is actually starting to come back. Just a little bit of oxygen down there, but it's showing that, in fact, we're changing not only the amount of nutrients in there, we're changing biogeochemical processes that are saying, hey, listen, we're actually dropping less and less oxygen out of the water and making more of it available for crabs, worms, and oysters out there as well. And then finally, we don't call them aquatic weeds that you guys call them like out here. We like aquatic grasses. They're important for crabs and rockfish and oysters and waterfowl. So we've actually set a numeric goal of 100% 15 years that somehow my USGS has got to explain those things because I'm not that old guy. But the system comes back. We built resilience back in there as well. The monitoring data allows us to look what's happening out there. And then finally, crash, you saw that as well. Look at that record number at the end there. Over 250 million female crabs in the system itself. It's bouncing around, but there was a 15-year period in there without numeric goals, without changing and adapting every single year. The fisheries management, we came close to losing the fishery. A source of economic, a source of cultural aspects, etc. So, folks, that's 6 lessons learned. When you put them in place, you can actually start to change the behavior. Not all 18 million people, but a lot of them out there. You can change the influence of that footprint that's out there as well. I'll take questions in a moment, but I'm actually putting my phone number up there. So you can feel to give me a call. You can call me on my mobile. You can get me on email as well. Now that I'm out of EPA, got a little bit of flexibility. I've teamed up with a colleague of mine who's been doing similar work in Tampa Bay. And we have essentially put ourselves out there working for good food. So we don't work for money. If you pay us money, and a good microbrewer that I had last night, that was a good payment enough. I was just in New Zealand for 3 weeks. They paid my way down there to work with them as well. So if you want to give me another plane ticket to New Zealand, I'd be pleased to do it. Or we come back and work with you all here in the Delta itself. I think there's some lessons learned that we can certainly expand to you all here in the Delta, up into the Sacramento and the San Joaquin, and down into the San Francisco Bay Area as well. So thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions, and after the discussion in the room, if there's still time, I will look online if there's any questions.
So a number of your lessons resonate really well here, but I'm curious if you could share things that you did that did not work well, that weren't on the list. So places where you stepped on a landmine.
Yeah. Oh, a huge one that we did. We still haven't quite figured out is working with our agricultural community. Certainly, have our farmers made progress? Absolutely. Definitely. In our case, if you look at the Farm Bill, what it provides in terms of the numbers of boots out the ground, the amount of cost share that's out there, we've gone to that level. And we might get about 30, 40% of our farmers putting practices on the ground. Our states are indicating in our conservation districts they need to get 80 to 90% of their farmers having a full suite of the right conservation practices on the ground. Conservation practices that are going to help their health of their herd, that's going to help their yield. These are business people that are driven by world markets out there. We have this gap between what the current infrastructure, well-intended, gets us about 40% of our farmers to get to 80, 90%. That one we haven't figured out how to do it. We need our farmers in place because we need to eat. They're important for local economies, regional economies, national economies. A well-managed piece of farmland is actually good for the Chesapeake and for local streams and rivers. That's one of the lessons learned that we haven't figured out how to do. But we're actually have places in each of our states that they're taking an area like in Pennsylvania, like Vista County, very intensive ag, a lot of Amish farmers, plains that community, and they're trying to figure out how to get to about 95%. Why? 800 miles of stream in one single county are impaired. They depend on the Amish farmers and others, part of their tourism. They depend on good, clean water for tourism and for drinking water as well. So we're trying to figure out how to do that, but that is certainly an area that we have not figured out how to break that ceiling and get up the level that the continental U.S. we haven't figured out in our infrastructure there to deliver support to our farmers is falling way, way short. But it's an excellent question. We could spend another half hour and say, here's what's not working, but we'll keep moving on.
Hi, you talked about incentives and accountability. Seems kind of like the stick and the carrot kind of idea. What are ways that you guys have implemented that have worked and have not worked for either one of those?
Yeah, I think on the accountability, some of it has worked. By having that, I'll flip back to that chart that I showed here that actually did red. This one, it was pretty powerful. It moved Maryland, which was sort of on the edge of a couple of issues in there. And in fact, their governor got really upset because we gave a yellow for urban stormwater. So it was a motivator to get states that were actually making good progress, but they felt a little bit, hey, we're doing the right thing, etc. But when we looked at the numbers, said, no, you're not meeting what you made. You made a commitment to the public to do this. You're falling behind, and you've you haven't made that take. We need to make that accountability out there. So an accountability system shouldn't always be looked at as a negative. It's a positive. Look at West Virginia down there. They're actually meeting a lot of their goals, but without doing a regulatory approach with their farmers, with their stormwater. And we said, you can go this way, that way. We're going to hold you accountable just to that end goal, but you can get there whatever way you want. So that was the case. So the state took it on. The governor said, 2 thumbs up. We got the good thing from the EPA, and our waters are running cleaner. But Pennsylvania, they haven't actually gotten the message. Their state legislature still hasn't figured out. Forget the Chesapeake. When you have one county that has 800 miles of adherent streams and it's impacting local economies and people's drinking water, something's not right with the system. So the accountability from a public perspective is good. We haven't been able to overcome some of to actually work with Pennsylvania to put other actions in place to motivate some of their elected officials to do things to help the state that will also meet their goals down here as well. So it's a double-edged sword in this particular case. We set up the expectation, but as an agency, we haven't taken fully what's happening out there. The Clean Water Act didn't require this. We actually built it on ourselves as a partnership, as I said earlier. A Virginia governor said that all 6 states agreed to it. Why? Because one state can't force another state to do that. There's got to be an entity that's looking at that whole thing to do it. And sometimes the federal government has limitations. Hence the reason you use, I hate to say it, but the public embarrassment factor. They say, you guys we're all working for the public. We need to show them who's doing it and who's not, who's falling short. So it's working to some degree, but the accountability hasn't been, as it was envisioned in 2008, we haven't carried out in full what we have committed to back then, and that's something that we'll just have to see if we're going to be able to do that into the future.
Can you describe, so you've described this great train that is fantastic, but can you describe the convergence of circumstance, events, and funding that happened in the early 80s that allowed this thing to come into being?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it was in the 70s that happened, and that was we were losing crabs. Rockfish were getting to the point where people weren't catching them out there. When you walked in waterfront, whether it's in Annapolis and Norfolk and Washington, D.C. on the Eastern Shore, waters were brown, they were green because of harmful algal blooms. So back then, Maryland Senator Matthias got all his senator and some of the congressional counterparts, and actually the 4 governors, and took them out of a boat and said, that's it, folks. We're going to go out in the middle of the Chesapeake. We're going to take a look at these conditions, and before we drive back to land, we're going to agree to try to figure this one out. What he did is he got a $25 million essentially appropriation from Congress to set up a 5-year study on the Chesapeake to understand what the issues were. Part of that was looking at what the environmental issues are, but part of it was also getting social scientists together with others to then look at the governance system. So that 5-year study ended up in the 1983 Chesapeake Bay Agreement. So we had a political agreement. We also had an infrastructure that being the partnership office in the beginning of our governance, and we had enough signs to indicate here's the direction we need to go in agreement of where you want to go. So it's like anything, a good crisis was taken advantage of, and that is we're going to lose the entire Chesapeake Bay ecosystem and the commercial, the recreational, the aesthetic quality of that system. And this big high political leadership got together and prompted that. And then from that point, then that suite of agreements in 1987 to 2000, and moved on from that original 1983 agreement. So it was really a crisis in terms of the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem crashing in the late 1970s that prompted the formation of the partnership based on that 5-year congressionally funded study. No, not at that point. There was a point that came along there, and then in that list there was the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, or total maximum daily load. That was a regulatory push that was really forced by other court decisions across the country that EPA wasn't working to put pollution diets on impaired streams out there. But at that point, no, it was not a regulatory one. It was really a public outcry and a recognition that we're going to lose something that whole Mid-Atlantic area gained tremendous wealth, both physical as well as other forms of wealth from having this body of water that had been for hundreds of years sustaining that local economy.
We have time for one really quick last question. And don't forget, afterwards, we can talk more with Rich on the 15th floor.
It seems like nitrogen and phosphorus were two of the main, constituents that you can put a number on a TMDL, a load. Can you just comment on some of the other contaminants or environmental factors or that are not related to issues we have here in the Delta?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my colleagues asked me to focus on water quality and nutrients. That's our big one. Chemical contaminants, we certainly have our share of the traditional heavy metals, PCBs, BAHs. They tend to be more concentrated around our large ports, Baltimore and Norfolk area, but also around Washington, D.C., where we have a fair amount of urbanized areas. We do have mercury issues, across the Chesapeake from a fish food perspective. We're actually starting to see positive responses. We've had places where a bunch of our fish have had tumors. That's actually been going down because we're slowly but surely either reducing the amount of chemical contaminants going out there, or our sediments are getting deposited deeper down in there. So our chemical contaminants are certainly an issue, not nearly as widespread and has much of an impact as nutrients. Other issues in the past, certainly overfishing, crabs, rockfish, oysters. Oysters were about 1% of the harvest that we had back in the 1880s. We're starting to rebuild oyster reefs in there to try to bring back less in terms of more oysters for commercial harvesting, more in terms of the ecosystem services they bring, because they're so important to a whole host of other species out there. Wetlands, we sort of hit at a low point. We're still maturely working our way back in that as well. Public access. We still are working to try to get more people more access points along the Chesapeake itself. Not only the Chesapeake, but on our streams and rivers up there. We've teamed up with some wonderful folks at the National Park Service and really connecting not just access points, but cultural connections there. And I think another place that we're still making headway is education, particularly our K through 12, trying to give kids some kind of what we call a meaningful outdoor experience, working with our state education programs and building it into curriculum. And, whether it's a stream or river, not like getting a kid out there mucking around and seeing, critters floating around in a particular thing and touching things out there to make an influence on them. So those are, as I showed in our graphic, about 6 different goal areas that cover the full restoration. I just wanted to focus here, given the amount of time, on nutrients. But those same lessons learned can apply in looking at land conservation and